going to get the fresh water? When you desalinate the ocean water, no question about it. Oh, it's too expensive. Forget about that. When oil is, $190 a barrel, the electricity that's driven by solar or whatever it may be, that fires at desal plants, and now there are already scaled up desal plants in Australia, which has a big drought problem, and in other places where it's already started. So we are essentially going to substitute, or we're going to provide or accommodate our loss of water and our need for water by essentially exploiting the ocean by desalinization of existing water.
That's Peter Neill, and this is Alternative Radio. I'm David Barsamian. This edition of AR features Peter Neill, Sea to Shining Sea, the Water Crisis. As the climate is getting warmer and the population is growing, many parts of the world are running out of water. The earth is rapidly drying up as demand far outstrips supply. Global consumption of water is doubling every 20 years. A crisis is looming. According to the United Nations, by 2025, as many as 3.5 billion people will face water scarcity. The potential for war and conflict is all too obvious. From Australia to Spain, record droughts have led to critical water shortages. A fraction of the planet's water is fresh. All the rest is salty. How can we create a just and sustainable future based on the idea of water as a commons and a public trust, and not a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder? Can new ways be found to increase our water supply? Our guest today is Peter Neill. He's director of the World Ocean Observatory. He also heads the Ocean Classroom Foundation and is the narrator of the World Ocean radio series. He served as president of the South Street Seaport Museum in New York for 20 years. He edited the literary anthology American Sea Writing. He spoke in Blue Hill, Maine. And now, Peter Neill.
When you go to talks like this, more often than not, the speaker will say, I'm not going to talk about the negative things. And then we'll proceed to give you 45 minutes of all the negativity. You'll see the photograph of the seagull with the cigarette lighter in its belly. You'll see the seal with the fishing net wrapped around its neck. You'll see the plastiki, the enormous island of plastics that's floating in the northern Pacific. And you'll see many, many other examples. And when you ask that speaker, what are we going to do about it? I have to tell you, 9 times out of 10, the answer is, I don't know. Because it seems so big, and it seems so beyond our understanding, our capacity to take it all in, and to see how we are going to proceed to react to the fact that the earth is exhausted. What I have tried to do is to essentially start there and look forward. And in order to do that, you need to address this concept, this sort of baseline situation where we see the ocean as a place apart. We walk the beach, we see the distant horizon, and the crisis is almost invisible. Those examples I gave you are many. You can find them all over the world. But the fact is, in terms of our understanding and our awareness and our actions, we are frozen. A recent public survey measured public awareness of ocean issues in the United States over a 10-year period, the last 10 years. And in fact, the needle did not move at all, not 1% increase. So what does that tell you? It tells you that perhaps all the work that's been done, all the research that's been done, all the money that has been spent may have not been spent on the right strategy. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of action. It's a lot of organizations all over the world that are essentially focusing on the idea of the ocean as a natural system, a place for species and habitat. And they stop right there. And when they do that, they deny the entire rest of the spectrum of the actuality, the circumstances of the ocean and its contribution to our human survival. So I argue and make as my essential premise in all of the work of the World Ocean Observatory that we define the ocean as an integrated global social system. It is a natural system. It is an economic system. It is a political system. And you add all that up and it turns into a social system. And the strategy going forward must transcend this fixation on species and habitat and include all of that additional material, which includes climate and freshwater and food and energy and economics and trade and transportation, policy, governance, cultural traditions, coastal development. I could go on and on and on. These are all ocean things, and they are in our lives in many, many ways. You can walk into a Walmart, and you can ask the people, where does all this come from? I don't know, China. How does it get here? I don't know, airplane. No, it doesn't come by airplane. If you close the port of San Diego, Walmart's supply, delivered by ship, will last on the shelves about 18 days. So shut down the ports, you shut down the global economy, and you certainly shut down an enormous set of very direct services that are provided to all of us in many different ways. So transcend the focus on species and habitat and relate to human interest and survival. And to do that, we must innovate and educate. I go to conference all over the world, and I constantly hear at the end, as we have summation and recommendation, education is the answer. So then because I'm a sort of a feisty fellow, will say, well, all right, how much money in your organization is actually dedicated to education and outreach? Oh, well, so much. I said, well, that's how many staff? That's 5 staff. Are all the staff positions filled? Oh, no, 3 of them were cut last year, and we haven't filled them for budgetary reasons. And what do you call education and outreach? Well, actually, it's public relations. It's basically reaching out to our own narrow audience. It's not actually taking what we know in this organization and invading and injecting it into the public education system or continuing education system or however you want to call it or whatever structure you want to choose. You're not actually communicating the true value and implication, and you're not contributing to the solution. So you have to transcend conventional outreach. Global communication, it's a globalized phenomenon. The internet is astonishing. I mean, we all know what it is, but the fact is it can foment revolution, and it can deliver messages all over the world, and it doesn't cost anything. It's astonishingly efficient. And as it was envisioned to be that way. It wasn't envisioned necessarily to be this marketplace for frivolous observation or the sale of unnecessary items. But that's what it's become. But still, the structure remains as this a very, very, very powerful tool to relate, particularly on a subject that may be exactly the same. The circumstances may be slightly different, but the issues and questions may be exactly the same whether you're in Blue Hill, Maine, or whether you're in Senegal. The artisanal fishermen are having the same problems. The coastal development and coastal erosion and sea level rise and temperature effects, they're the same problems. And so this unifying aspect of the ocean sort of fits to our logo, which in fact is a reversal, that basically our logo is the map of the map of the world with the land dropped out. So when you think about this social system, here are just some of the things that you're talking about. So take climate, it's weather, it's acidification. The pH of the ocean has shifted. That completely changes water temperature, current patterns, feeding patterns. And that then follows with subsequent up the food chain consequences. Environmental refugees. We never think about this, but if you look at what would happen, or what has happened, actually frequently, many times in Bangladesh, where monsoons have come in and flooded all those low-lying estuary and wetland areas that constitute the entire coast of Bangladesh. What happens when there are 10 million environmental refugees on India's eastern border? So you have to start thinking about things. One of the allies that we're talking with for our own sort of amplification is the International Red Cross, because they're aware. They're the ones that are responding to the tsunamis. They're the ones that are responding to the floods and coasts. I just heard on the radio coming here today that a report was issued here that says New England's rainfall has been, over the last 65 years, on an upward trajectory, which means an enormous shift in the natural systems of the state, its traditional crops, and its natural populations of birds and animals and insects. All of that is shifting before our very eyes. And this is known. Freshwater. The one thing we all learn at school, is probably the one thing that everybody remembers from science, is the water cycle. It's a sort of an astonishingly simple thing. There are two cycles in the ocean. One is the water cycle. The other is the circulation cycle. And those two things explain almost everything. So when you realize that there's of the total amount of water on the Earth, 97% of it is salt, 3% of it is fresh, 2 of the 3% are locked in the caps. So 7 billion people are existing on the same amount of finite amount of water. And when it goes from 7 to 10 billion, the amount of water is not going to change unless we do something about it. It's the one thing that all of us need, rich, poor, north, south, black, white, yellow, green. It doesn't matter. We all need the same amount of water every day. And you can argue that it's a basic human right. It's the most valuable commodity on Earth. And we see it being monetized and exploited and distributed in ways that are absolutely reprehensible and incredibly ignorant in the short term, not to mention the long term. Fisheries we know about, but you have to understand that fisheries are connected to something. Let's just say nitrate fertilization in the Midwest and the Mississippi watershed affects 44 states, 2 countries. And so you can fertilize the fields of Kansas and Missouri and Ohio, and what happens at the end of the pipe is this enormous area in the Gulf of Mexico in which nothing can live. There is no oxygen. Forget about Deepwater Horizon. When you think about what has already been done by us, not by BP, but by us, in our insatiable need for sugar and grain, and our commitment to industrial agriculture and to nitrogen-based fertilizers, that has a very, very dramatic and evident consequence. Energy, health, just an incidental fact, I think about a half of the cancer drugs in clinical trial today are derived from marine organisms. We've exhausted the terrestrial pharmacopoeia. What's happening now with microbes from land is basically we're mitigating the effects of drugs we've already invented. And so you can now go in and pull out all of these this new genetic material. It can be analyzed, replicated, and industrialized in a way that it will be the cure for the diseases that are the consequences of decisions that have already been made. Trade, globalization of goods and services, well, we know about that. Ships, ports, canals, we read about piracy. International finance. The largest employer in the state in the city of New York is the Port Authority, like 450,000 people. Now, it's not all ship-based, but the fact is that it is still a place of exchange of goods and services and ideas, of course, and invasive species, all of which come in the ships, and which, by the way, all those patterns of trade are about to change because of the widening of the Panama Canal and the consequential construction of deeper draft ships that can take 18,000 containers. And those ships can't come to the Port of New York. So they're going to offload in Halifax, or they're going to go south in such a way that, what does that mean? It means that, one, it has implications for a east-west highway, for example. It has implications for rail development that has been abandoned. It has implications for coastwise transportation and trade because the highways are already clogged. It has all this kind of implication that some people are thinking about, but most of us are not. Global deliberation. The UN has something called the International Oceanographic Commission. It's all of the agencies combined. It is a huge UN-driven, policy-based set of organizations that do have some jurisdiction. For example, there's the International Seabed Authority. It's based in Jamaica. It's been around for, 10, 20 years. It's never heard a single case. But it's there. And this is for invasion of the sea bottom, issues that come out of the exploitation probably for minerals. And there have been several attempts that have not yet been fully developed, but they will be in terms of excavation and exploitation of mineral deposits on the ocean floor. The law of the sea, I think it's now 124 nations have ratified the law of the sea. Australia has not. The United States has not. In fact, just a few weeks ago, the U.S. House of Representatives, it was voted down again, even though almost every major agency, including the Defense Department, supports it. Why? Because, quote, it infringes on American sovereignty. The law of Rio plus 20, I didn't go. I'd gone to Copenhagen. I couldn't bear it again because of the disappointment of all of these organizations coming together, delegations of optimistic youth and their T-shirts and their songs and their sense of possibility, and then to watch China and the U.S. and India following suit and a number of other things, essentially just closing down the dialogue. And there are reports, and some people are trying to put the most optimistic spin on those things. But in fact, if you go back to the original recommendations in Rio 20 years before, the evaluation is that we haven't even done 50% of that. So that this whole idea of international and global policy is a very difficult and complicated thing. It goes on, though. It goes on. There are NGOs, you know them all. Most of them, you may be members of them all. They are mostly focused on species and habitat. They are driven by their mission. They do good works. Their membership is going down. So what do we do about it in terms of governance? President Obama, by executive order, declared a national ocean policy. There have been 2 commissions in the United States to develop recommendations, and those have been combined into a quite excellent set of recommendations and all the rest of it. And it is not being either legislated or funded for a variety of reasons. Even with the statutory regulations that we have now, we fail to enforce them. And this is true all over the world. You can have treaties that say control the amount of tuna that can be caught in the world. And routinely, the Japanese will harvest 20 to 30% more, routinely. And there's no enforcement. There's no way of slapping their hand. There's no way of doing this other than don't eat tuna, which I don't do anymore, any kind of tuna. Because the only way that this is going to stop is by essentially reversing market forces and letting people know that we're not going to accept that kind of exploitation of the species to extinction. Coastal development, we don't see it so much here, but when you start going down to the south and the Gulf, the wetlands and estuary areas have all been filled. The mangroves around the world have been decimated. And the entire natural system of protection and incubation of marine species that those places and natural species, plant species provide has been lost. Think of it only in terms of protection of erosion and storm. And you realize that we have systematically taken those natural barriers away, those sponges and welcoming mud flats that essentially diminish and delete the power of a storm as it comes in, and which nurture all the young marine species. Cultural traditions, recreation and spiritual renewal in every culture around the world, from baptism to sacred rivers, that you find in the art and in the music and in the poetry and in the literature. The ocean plays a kind of underlying metaphor for all kinds of things. Freedom. We are water. Our communities are water. Our bodies are water. All of these things are part and parcel of a consciousness and a subconsciousness that is inherent in every society in the land. You cannot go to any country in this world that has an ocean connection that doesn't have profound spiritual beliefs and cultural manifestations. And finally, political action, the lack of public awareness and political will. So the World Ocean Observatory was actually founded after this 1998 Independent World Commission. It was not UN, it was not government. It was 150 very interesting people who got together under the leadership of Mario Soares, the former president of Portugal, and created what is the most prescient plan for the future of the ocean, set of recommendations. It's, of course, completely forgotten. I found it in the dollar bin in a Cambridge bookstore. And I looked at it and I said, oh, my goodness, this is astonishing. What does this is the most important thing I've ever read. And I then went to do some due diligence to see why it hadn't been done. The recommendation was, the final, penultimate recommendation was, that there be created a place of exchange of education and informational services about the ocean defined as an integrated global social system. And it was to aggregate and distribute the information worldwide through the internet. And so it was supposed to be done by an organization in Malta. They never got around to it. And I met with individuals and said, well, what about me? Can I do this? And they looked at me and said, well, why not? And so basically, I mean, this is the truth, one person, now translated into 1.5 FTE, basically has done all this work over the last 5 years and has gone and created a platform which I think now is become one of the most innovative and broad-based and dynamic places that you can go, and has taken serious steps toward realization of the World Commission's recommendation. So here are some new premises to think about. We've moved from a natural system to a social system. We need to understand that the ocean begins at the mountaintop and it ends at the abyssal plain. And that as water moves in the water cycle, basically that entire process is oceanic. And that entire process needs to be understood and responded to. And we don't do it. We will do something here, and we will not think one moment about the consequences of what we do here in the next town downstream. And that is irresponsible. And slowly but surely, that kind of planning has to be changed. That kind of insular thinking has to be changed. We have to understand that it is a system of process that has tremendous ongoing downstream implications and back again. From micro and macro in return, we look at a problem here. We say, oh my God, it's here, it's small, it's an algae bloom or whatever it is. It needs to migrate to the macro level, in which it's then looked at, researched, ideas are derived, recommendations are made, policies can be defined, technology can be adapted, and then it needs to be migrated back down again to the micro. And that's true at every level, whether it's the technical level or the political level. You start here, it goes up, it gets refined, and then it comes back down for application. Research to responsibility. How many times have I asked research scientists, do you go out into the world and promulgate what you do? Do you take responsibility in any way? And most don't. And they don't think that's part of their job, and fair enough. Some do. And some want to, but don't have the skills. And so what we're trying to do is to essentially say, look, here's a tool for a scientist or an organization, a research organization or institute, to partner with somebody who's basically only about communications. We want to take the data and transform it into formats that then can go out into the world. And we can do that by putting our resources together. So this whole concept of taking responsibility for the outcome of research is another premise to think about. Mitigation and adaptation to invention. You know, you can mitigate an event. You can adapt. The key word these days is adaptation. We're going to adapt to the situation. I hate it. I can't stand it, because what it says is we're just going to accept what's happened. It basically lowers the bar to the status quo, and we're going to adapt to that, and we're not actually going to think about what we're going to do that's different. We're not going to learn from the experience. We're only going to adapt to it. So New Orleans is a very good example, but there are many others. And so you have to do, say, as the Dutch have done, where you invent a very elaborate mitigation scheme, but one that has been thought forward in a way that's based on sea level rise of not a few inches, but many feet. And they're doing it again. The Dutch government has already concluded that they need to build yet another barrier to essentially protect their land, which is, mostly underwater. From apathy to action, we have to be able to find a way to take this information, take our concern, because we all have it, and transform it from, well, what can I do about it, into a set of actions that do matter and that you can do. And it doesn't require a lot of money. It just requires the kind of will, and that's this new community of citizens of the ocean. So there's a pledge. Take the pledge. Take the pledge. It's nothing. All it does is it's a click. Take the pledge. But think about every one of these things. And some of you I know are doing these things already in this community. Consume seafood and seafood products at home or in restaurants that have been raised or harvested through documented sustainable process. With all due respect, go look at the fish display at Tradewinds. It's a perfect example. And we should not be eating about 50% of that fish. Go sit in your doctor's office and see the sign that says, don't eat swordfish, because pregnant women don't eat swordfish. Well, what's the difference between me and a pregnant woman, for God's sake? If it's poisonous, it's toxic, if I eat a lot of swordfish, it's going to help me too, hurt me too. So I don't eat swordfish unless I know where it comes from, and even then I don't. So you have to sit and make these kinds of decisions, and I've also become a real pain in restaurants, particularly sushi bars. And I'll just say, look, you're perpetuating a thing that is so short-sighted, because basically what you're going to do is corrupt your own supply. And that has, that's sort of silly. Well, the public demands it. Well, not necessarily. In fact, there are sushi bars in Portland, Oregon, and many other places that have essentially said, we're only going to serve sustainable fish, fresh, sustainable, locally harvested fish. And they have used all of the sushi techniques and all of the tastes and textures and all of the aesthetic values and apply them, and you can eat it to your heart's content, because you know that you're not essentially destroying or contributing to the destruction of a species.
You're listening to Peter Neill, Sea to Shining Sea, The Water Crisis. This is Alternative Radio. You can order copies of this program by calling our toll-free number, 1-800-444-1977. That's 1-800-444-1977. Or you can order online on our website, alternativeradio.org. That's alternativeradio.org.
Plastic containers. I went through the supermarket the other day and just looked at all of the things that are in packaged processed containers. And I looked at all the things that I don't buy. And I found the ones that I do. And I said, okay, I got to figure out which of these 4 or 5 I'm going to change. I'm going to change my habit here. I'm not going to buy my biodegradable green soap in a plastic container. I'm going to find another way to get that same soap, or I'm going to use one container and refill it, but I'm not going to keep buying container after container. And I'm going to deliberately choose not to take used food that has been processed or wrapped in these plastic non-biodegradable materials. The worst one is the little absorbent, the platform in that you buy meat in with the absorbent pad. So it's styrofoam, and it's an absorbent pad that's plastic and all the rest of it. Well, some companies or some fish markets are now presenting that fish packaged with a pulp paper container. And there's a little company here in Maine that has developed a small absorbent pad that can be used, which is biodegradable. So that company needs to succeed. that market needs to essentially start to provide its fish in non-plastic containers and meat. And that's a very simple thing to do, but if everybody did it, it would make a huge, huge difference. Freshwater recycling. I don't know. I think some of you may do it for your gardens. I read a PhD thesis the other day of a young guy, an architect, who has designed an entire building that essentially incorporates every aspect of human use of fresh water, including its cleaning, its treatment, etc. And it then goes out to provide drinking water, to provide irrigating water, to provide energy, because it's a vertical structure, so the water is constantly going down in a gravity-fed thing that turns turbines, that creates electricity, that powers the building, even to a public bath on the first floor, so that you can go in and have a lovely public bath a la Turkey, etc. And you're making a statement. You're making a solid conservation statement. There are others. Lawn fertilizers. That's insecticides, big problem. I watched a lady yesterday in Camden. I was driving by, and she had her pump out there, and I'm sure she had Roundup in it, and she was going down the line on the curb, trying to get the weeds off the curb, and as I drove by, not one, not two, but 3 storm drains. So all that poison is going to kill the plants, but it's all then going to go in the next rainstorm. Much of it's going to go down through that draining system, and it's going to go out into the harbor. And there's more. But the idea here is that you can, each of us, create a list of behaviors that are individual and local and which, collectivized, can make an enormous difference in solving the problem. Accept the individual commitment. Communicate the full social spectrum. So now, at dinner, with your children or with your guests, you're not just talking about the fishing problem in Maine. You're talking about the agriculture problem in Maine. You're talking about the planning that's required to protect simple working waterfronts against extreme weather and sea level rise. The U.S. Navy has 725,000 buildings at sea level. Think about it. All over the world. They have a task force. Amazingly enough, they have a task force which is essentially evaluating every one of those buildings, relocating their functions in places that are, 10 to 14 feet above the current thing, as a precautionary measure that is justified by national security. So there's another topic. The security of the nation is involved here. We're going to move naval bases from places that are at sea level. Norfolk is already flooding many, many times every year, where simply it's not just high tides, it's not just wind-blown retention of water, it's sea level rise. They haven't built, the land is below the sea level. And that has incredible ramifications for what happens in one of the most important naval ports in the country. Attack the conventional barriers. It's a little tricky in this world because I come up with NGO people all the time. I have the Nature Conservancy, Oceana, Ocean Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund. They're all out there. They're all earnest. They're all working their tails off. They're all trying to do the job. And who am I to come in and say, guys, this is you're cutting off your nose. Well, we do marine protected areas. That's great. But you can turn the entire ocean into a marine protected area, he asserts. And you will not solve the problem until you address the real problem of the mega cities. The major cities, 20 largest cities in the world, I think 18 of them are on the coast or at the mouths of rivers, or in rivers that feed directly into the sea. And what happens in those cities in terms of manufacturing runoff and all of the stuff, salt, from the snow, but all of this stuff is connected, and it's enormous in scale. So you can make a 20 square mile marine protected area or a 100 square mile marine protected area in the emptiness of the Pacific, and it's great. It's great. But the real problem's over here. So today, very few cities, some are starting to think about it. Some cities, New York City is amazing at this point, where they have simply created a system where all agencies that have to deal with development and change and construction in the city have to meet a new set of premises, and they have to communicate together, and they have to use materials that have been already identified. So what you put on the surface of your parking lot roof, how you do the swale where two streets come together, what materials you use in the concrete, and how you lay the concrete out in terms of how water runs through the new area. Where does that water go? How is it treated? All of those things are part of the consideration to be made about development, urban development. And where we see tremendous progress, I think, potentially, is taking these premises and values and injecting them back into the urban centers, and where that consciousness, collectivized, is considerably greater in scale than our few towns here in the Blue Hill Peninsula. It doesn't diminish what we're doing by any means, but it is very important that we start to focus in that area. New communications tools, build local, regional, and global awareness, translate it into political will, and provide the structure and strategy for action. And that requires, basically, from my point of view, sort of relentless communication. Repetition of the message over and over and over again, and in many applications and ways that I can. So beyond adaptation, population growth, people have to understand that, my well went dry this year. There was an earthquake. And the next day I woke up and our well was dry. Panic. There was a trial, a TV show I got involved with at one point, and it was a group in New Jersey, a family in New Jersey, a family of 5, parents, 3 kids, 2 teenagers, 1 small child. And the reality show was that they were only going to be allowed to have 20 gallons of water each. The show was canceled because the actors completely fell apart. That the tension and argument and dysfunction of the family was so profound that basically they couldn't sustain the story over enough weeks to make it commercially viable. So the fact is, it will take a very short amount of time for us to begin to understand what it means not to have water, or not to have water in the amounts that we're used to. So here is something to think about. Shift from consumption to utility. We are a consumer-based society, and we are consuming insatiably with no concern for the fact that in many cases now we are pushing our resources to extinction. And it's just not right. It's not fair. It's not smart. But what if you started measuring things by their utilitarian value? What is it we need? What if everybody had a certain number of things, or a certain number, a baseline, a utilitarian baseline of water, a garden and a hoe, a hook and a net, a well, a roof, a stove, a place to be healed, a community to live in. If everybody could have that to start, so that we were all, that level of well-being was guaranteed as a human right, and then consume on by essentially paying for and pricing and valuing the things beyond that consumers want. So you're not destroying the safety net. You're not building socialism. You're simply saying, look, everybody has the right to live at this level of being. And if you've worked hard and you've done this and you've done that and you want to express that and spend your money that way to have more, you can have more, but you're going to pay for it. And you're going to pay real value. What do we pay for water? Nothing. The water in this state, the aquifer is being diminished. What is it? Every 10 minutes, a 10,000 gallon truck leaves the state of Maine with our aquifer water, for which we're paid practically nothing. we're monetizing water to the point where there are contracts proposed and facilities being built for water harvested at industrial levels to go from Canada to India. And it's monetarily, it's financially feasible to do that. That they create tankers that are going to move water in streams across the ocean to essentially provide water to a country that is, in dire need of water. New measures of value. Ecosystem services is sort of a fancy name for essentially analyzing the true economic value of all aspects of a transaction. So when you look at the true financial value, let's say, of oil, of the oil business, well, you have to first of all, take out the subsidy. That's the first thing. Take out the subsidy. Take out the fact that we're paying, we, the consumers, are paying for that oil 3 times. We pay for it, we own it, by the way. That oil is a public resource. It is essentially licensed to private enterprise. Private enterprise is subsidized to use it, to exploit it. It is then, the values are then, the profits are then distributed to a very much smaller number of people, not all of us, but a very much smaller people over here. So all of us own the oil, all you guys own the oil, but in the end, you've paid for the subsidy, but you guys are the ones that are getting the dividends. Oh, and by the way, it comes back to us the 3rd time because all of us have to pay for it again. Because we're going to go back to the pump and buy it again. So 3 times we've paid for a resource that we own. That is absurd. Now, can you defeat that? Well, who knows. But the point is, think about that. And if you start thinking about that in terms of how we price things, how we value things, so you start to say, well, do I really need this? No. This is more needful. This is more utilitarian. This is more valuable. And the prices then would change. And if you started making those kinds of judgments and distinctions, many things that are priced here would just collapse, disappear. And the world might be better for it. The jobs could be placed elsewhere because there'll be new things that are valued, and their price will go up. And so you have a kind of realignment of the cycle in such a way that is a true measure of value. Connection and conciliation of interests. All of our interests are separate. Everybody's got their own private interest. Makes me nuts. Because everybody makes the decision within the context of their self, and they're then the next concentric circle out. And I can understand the natural implication of that. But in fact, if you could understand that the connection that could be made in that context would contribute not only to maybe your relationship with your neighbor, or the health of your community, or the functionality of your office and business. I mean, this whole dissonance of self-interest versus collective interest is, in a world where the population is exploding every day, doesn't make any sense. We're going exactly the wrong way in how we think about how we should be living. Applied knowledge, what we know we have to apply. And that's, again, individual and collective. To build a new hydraulic society, this probably needs a little bit more work, but I'm trying to build out an idea of how this all works together and how it can be created using our existing tools if only these premises and value shifts can be made. So you can start thinking about what's the new city look like. Well, in Holland, again, they're building floating cities. Amazing. And they're quite amenable, they're safe, they rise and fall with the tide, sea level rise doesn't matter, and they're starting to think about engineering and zoning and planning. The new jargon in the policy world is marine spatial planning, because they can't stand the word zoning. Zoning just, it's like the word climate now. It just sets off people because they've created a whole new definition for what it is. So zoning is an abomination, and yet we zone directly and indirectly every day. Zoning is taking place as we essentially make collective decisions about land use and all the rest of it. So how do we do that in such a way that we create processes that essentially build on the continuity from mountaintop to abyssal plain, use these new techniques and technologies that are available to us, renounce the things that poison the environment, accept new ideas and strategies that don't, and still advance the values of community and health, and create something that will work. That will work. Because if we stay the way we're going now, as we see, we are now in a paralysis of pointing fingers. No one will budge. No one will budge. For whatever reason. Sometimes the reason for not budging here has something to do which is concretized over here. But the fact is that nothing is happening. And this is not exclusive to us. There are lots of places where this is happening. And in fact, the other part of our system, if the system of governance is paralyzed, we now have an economic system that may be paralyzed. And it is now questioning all of the assumptions of capitalism. Capitalism is not a bad thing, I don't think, personally. But I think unlimited capitalism, excessive capitalism, is just like eating too much chocolate. It'll kill you. And I think that's what's going on. And I think it's at a scale now that we can just say, oh, well, it'll get better. I don't think so. I don't think so. I could be wrong. I'd love to be wrong. But I sort of believe that what if you don't? And I've always wanted to say this to the people who deny climate and sea level rise and global warming and all these things. They say, oh, no, North Carolina legislature passes or tries to pass a vote that says it's statutorily illegal to talk about that climate change is statutorily illegal. The U.S. House in some of the appropriation bills, somewhere in the appropriation bills, I read that that no dollars to be appropriated and no funds already appropriated can be spent on any program in any agency that has the word climate in it. Now that, what do you do with a situation like that? So unless we, outside of this structure, can begin to think and advocate for new premises, new ideas, new approaches, and put our individual and collective weight behind it, we will not prevail. And the risk is high. And by the way, the risk is higher for our children. My premise is, and I believe this with all my heart, that we are smart enough to do it if, in fact, we'll come to the understanding of what it means. And so that's all this is. That's all this is. It's just one little guy in an office in Sedgwick, Maine. Might as well be hiding behind the curtain, the green curtain, pulling the levers, trying to essentially push out into the world an attitude. Basically, at one point some guy, or I gave this talk, and some guy with a sneer said, "We were trying to save the world." And I said, "Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, goddammit. And get up off your tail and go do it too." And my point was that has to happen. And by the way, most of us already know it. Even the most derelict in their duties. If you get to them, talking to them quietly on the side, you say, "Well, what about this? What do you think about that?" They say, "Well, you're right, but," and then the but comes, and the but comes because, I'm out of step with the caucus. And I just want to scream. So it requires not only a sense of identity, it also requires courage. It requires a kind of individual courage of each and every one of us to step up. We all become little old ladies in tennis shoes, and we march and we sing and we do all these things that essentially say to the world, no, this is wrong. We can do differently. And we must do differently. My problem is I worry about the urgency. I mean, the lack of urgency is what I feel. So maybe now I'm of an age where suddenly there is no time, so therefore I think everything is urgent. But not really. I think that our kids need to know about this too. They are not necessarily any more cognizant about it than we are. The fastest growing major in the United States is environmental science, but there are no jobs. Incredible. Sir? it's a problem because most of these, if you look at it from the point of view of the financial context, most of the world economies swallowed the Kool-Aid. So you sit there and you say, why is it that we have developed a culture that is so selfish, that is paradoxically based on all of these principles and premises of freedom and equality? And yet, what do? By our actions, we continuously limit people's freedoms. We continuously exploit inequalities or advance inequalities between people. And then we sanctimoniously walk around and say, well, look at us. We're number one. And in fact, we are not number one. We're not number one in education. Soon we won't be number one in gross national product or whatever, gross domestic product. We may already not be, I'm not sure. We're not, we're not number one in medicine. We're not necessarily number one in research. Our education system is falling apart. What are we thinking? And when are the people going to wake up to do something about it? And for me, the ocean is both symbol and reality of that world. And in it, by the way, are the solutions. Why? What are they? It's really simple. Let's just figure it out. Look, where are we going to get the fresh water? We're going to desalinate the ocean water. No question about it. Oh, it's too expensive. Forget about that. When oil is, $190 a barrel, the electricity that's driven by solar or whatever it may be, that fires at desal plants, and now there are already scaled up desal plants in Australia, which has a big drought problem, and in other places where it's already started. So we are essentially going to substitute, or we're going to provide or accommodate our loss of water and our need for water by essentially exploiting the ocean by desalinization of existing water, number one. Number two, the ocean is a tremendous opportunity for energy. Not wind energy and not tidal energy, but it's a geothermal, it's a heat pump. It's an enormously powerful heat pump. It's just right there outside our doors. And all of these cities are right there. So how do you figure out, how do you turn that and use that technique? Let's put our minds to that. Let's put our engineers to work on that. And let's start to figure out food, protein. How are we going to eat? What are we going to eat? If we can't eat corn because we can't use nitrogen-based things because we're going to pollute every waterway we live in, they're going to turn on the tap, they're all going to catch on fire. How are we going to grow food to eat? We're going to go in the ocean. That's where we're going to go. And we will find ways to farm fish, and we'll find ways to use and create new fish-based products. I mean, 40% of the world now gets all its protein from marine life already. Happens to be the poorest communities in the world. As soon as we got rich, we started eating meat, and the meat needed to be grazed and packaged, and it goes on and on and on. So when I look at the local farming movement, and I look at what happens on the peninsula here, where you have all of a sudden these young people coming in and opening these farms, I say hallelujah. And when I see young people coming into the fisheries and starting to say or question some of the premises on which that entire industry in Maine has been built, I say hallelujah. And when I start seeing some politicians begin to understand that there's economic possibility and community value built in different kinds of expression and use of municipal funding and bond issues and things like that, I say hallelujah. So all of this kind of stuff that will come out of these synaptic changes, once you change your mind, what follows afterwards is not rocket science. It really isn't. We have technology that's available. Once you say, I'm not going to look at it this way anymore, I'm going to look at it this way. And as soon as I start looking at it this way, everything happens, in the brain cells, in the body, in the behavior, in the political commitment, in the religious beliefs. You step forward. Thank you.
That was Peter Neill, Sea to Shining Sea, the Water Crisis. He spoke in Blue Hill, Maine. Peter Neill is the director of the World Ocean Observatory. He also heads the Ocean Classroom Foundation. This program is produced by Alternative Radio, an unembedded award-winning weekly series based in Boulder, Colorado. Ralph Nader calls AR Audio Energy for Democracy. Since we began broadcasting in 1986, AR is independent. That's why we can do programs such as the one you just heard, or others with Maud Barlow, Bill McKibben, Vandana Shiva, Medea Benjamin, Glenn Greenwald, David Suzuki, and Arundhati Roy. We have an extensive Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn archive. We also have a series of books. Our latest is with Richard Wolff, Occupy the Economy, Challenging Capitalism. To access our complete audio and book archive, just go to our website, alternativeradio.org. Again, our website where we are podcasting, alternativeradio.org. To place a credit card order for a CD, MP3, or written transcript of Peter Neill, Sea to Shining Sea, The Water Crisis, call us toll-free at 1-800-444-1977. Again, that toll-free number is 1-800-444-1977. Or you can order on our secure website, alternativeradio.org. That's alternativeradio.org. Special thanks to Matt Murphy and Amy Brown of WERU in Blue Hill, Maine. Series theme music is performed by the Kronos Quartet from Pieces of Africa. Joe Ritchie is our editor. I'm David Barsamian. Thank you for listening.